My sister-in-law slapped me at my own anniversary dinner for serving myself before her. You forget your place in this family, she snapped, while my husband just looked away. I set down my fork and slapped her back. Then I stared at the text until the screen dimmed and locked itself. Then I unlocked it and stared some more. I worked for Wilhelmina for 2 years. I have the real invoices. You need to see them. Barnaby leaned across the table and read it upside down without asking permission, which told me everything about how seriously he was taking this. Don't respond yet, he said. Let me run the number first. Could be nothing. Could be someone trying to sell you a story. And if it's not, then we're about to find out how deep this actually goes. He was already typing into his laptop, cross-referencing the number against something I couldn't see. Give me until tomorrow morning. I drove home to my parents' house, which I was already starting to call home again after 11 days, the way your tongue finds a missing tooth, and I sat on the edge of the guest bed while my kids slept down the hall in the room that used to be my brother's. Wilhelmina, my daughter, was 7 and had cried twice that week, asking when we were going back to Daddy's house. My son, Denton, was 5 and hadn't asked at all, which worried me more. I thought about the account statements Barnaby had shown me. $60,000 in installments of $800, $1,200, once as much as $4,000, always labeled something soft and forgettable. Family loan, W's business bridge, helping out. I thought about the quitclaim form with my forged name curling at the bottom in a hand that wasn't quite mine, close enough to fool a notary who clearly hadn't looked twice. I thought about 11 years of small humiliations I'd swallowed because I told myself family was supposed to be difficult, that loyalty meant absorbing things. I didn't feel that way anymore. I felt like I'd been living in a house with termites for over a decade and had just now found the hollow places in the walls. At 9:14 the next morning, Barnaby called. The number belongs to a Marisol Vance, 31, address in Elm Ridge, no criminal record. She worked as kitchen manager and bookkeeper for Thorne and Wren Catering. That's Wilhelmina's company, from March of 2022 until she quit this past February. Quit or fired? Quit. Filed a wage complaint with the Department of Labor a month later for unpaid overtime, which is public record, which is how I confirmed she's real. He paused. Jocelyn, I think you should talk to her, in person, somewhere neutral. I'll have someone from my office with you, and we'll record it, with her consent, from the start. We met Marisol Vance 3 days later at a diner off Route 9, the kind of place with vinyl booths and a laminated menu that hadn't changed prices since before my wedding. She was younger than I expected, with tired eyes and a manila envelope pressed flat against her chest like a shield. I saw the divorce filing, she said, before I'd even sat down. It's public record if you know where to look. I've been waiting for someone to ask the right questions about that business for 2 years. She slid the envelope across the table. Inside were photocopies, real vendor invoices from a produce supplier called Halloway Farms, a linen rental company, a wine distributor, numbers that didn't remotely match what Wilhelmina had reported to me, to Grantham, to the small circle of family who'd occasionally asked how the catering business was doing. She told everyone she was booking 40, 50 events a year, Marisol said. The real number was closer to 12. Half of those, the client never paid in full because the food was late or wrong or she double-booked staff. I know because I was the one fielding the angry calls. Then where was the money coming from? I asked. Though I already suspected. Different places at different times, but the past 4 years, mostly from what she called the family fund. She'd tell vendors she was waiting on a transfer. Sometimes it'd land within a day or two of nothing. No wedding, no gala, no reason for that kind of cash to move. Marisol tapped one of the invoices. I do the math for a living, Mrs. Calloway. Or I did. The business was never solvent. It survived on money coming in from somewhere else, and everybody who worked there front of house had no idea, because Wilhelmina kept 2 sets of books. One for show, one that was real. I felt my stomach drop the way it does on the first hill of a roller coaster, that half second where your body knows before your brain catches up. Why come forward now? I asked. Marisol's jaw tightened, because she asked me to backdate 3 invoices last winter to cover a shortfall before her accountant filed taxes. I refused. She said if I said anything, she'd tell people I stole from the register, which I didn't, and that no judge in this county would believe a line cook over a Thorne. She looked at me steadily. I've been carrying these files around for months because I didn't know who'd actually do something with them. Then I saw your name in a court filing, and I thought, her. She's already fighting them. She'll listen. Barnaby's associate, a quiet young woman named Priya, had been recording the whole exchange on her phone, propped against the napkin dispenser with Marisol's permission. When we left the diner, Barnaby called an emergency meeting for that evening. That was the start of the second loop, the one where I stopped being able to tell myself this was just a bad marriage ending badly. This was something with edges, something criminal. I told myself, driving home with the manila envelope on the passenger seat like it might slide off and vanish if I looked away too long, that maybe there was still a version of this where it didn't have to go further. Maybe I could sit Grantham down, show him the invoices, and he'd be as horrified as I was. Maybe some part of him that still loved me would finally choose me over his mother's version of peace. I called him that night instead of texting, because some conversations deserve a voice. I need you to look at something, I said, and read him 3 lines from Marisol's invoices, the real numbers against the ones Wilhelmina had reported at Thanksgiving 2 years running. There was a long silence on the line. Then, Jose, you can't just believe some disgruntled ex-employee. She's probably still mad about the overtime thing. I have her Department of Labor filing. I have the actual receipts. This isn't a grudge, Grantham. This is math. My mother wouldn't let this happen to you. Whatever's going on with Wilhelmina's business, that's not about us. I sat with the phone against my ear and felt something in my chest go very still and very cold, the particular quiet that comes right before you stop expecting someone to surprise you. It became about us the day $60,000 left our account, I said, and hung up before he could answer. That was the last time I tried to hand him the truth gently. After that, I let the lawyers do the talking. Barnaby brought in a forensic accountant the following week, Oswald Kim, CPA, a soft-spoken man with reading glasses perched on his forehead who'd spent 18 years untangling exactly this kind of financial knot for family law and fraud cases. He spread 3 years of bank statements, Wilhelmina's vendor invoices, and Marisol's real numbers across Barnaby's conference table like a man building a house of cards he intended to knock down on purpose. This isn't sloppy, Oswald said, after 2 hours of silence broken only by the tapping of his calculator. Sloppy would almost be a relief. This is structured, amounts kept under reporting thresholds, transfers timed to coincide with legitimate family occasions, birthdays, holidays, so they'd read as gifts if anyone ever asked. Whoever built this pattern understood exactly how to avoid triggering scrutiny. He looked up at me over his glasses. The question isn't whether money moved. The bank records already prove that. The question is whether your husband knew he was funding a business that was functionally insolvent, and whether the document transferring partial ownership of your house was forged to cover the shortfall if it ever came out. It was forged, I said. You've seen the signature. I've seen an amateur forgery, Oswald said. Convincing to a notary in a hurry, not convincing to someone who looks closely. That someone turned out to be Dr. Lucinda Pratt, a certified forensic document examiner with 22 years in the field, brought in by Barnaby's office to formalize what we already suspected. She met with me in a small, windowless room lined with light boxes and magnifiers that looked more like surgical tools than office equipment. Signatures aren't just shapes, Dr. Pratt explained, laying my genuine signature, pulled from 3 mortgage documents, a passport renewal, and my design firm's incorporation papers, beside the quitclaim signature under a raking light. Their motion, pressure, rhythm. A forger can copy the shape of a letter. What they can't copy is the exact sequence of strokes, the natural pen lifts, the acceleration and deceleration a person's hand makes, without thinking about it, because they've written their own name 10,000 times. She pointed to the quitclaim signature with the tip of a pencil, careful not to touch the paper. See here, where the J curves back into the O? Your genuine signature does this in one continuous stroke. This one has a hesitation, a pen lift, right there, invisible to the naked eye but visible under magnification. That's someone drawing your name, not writing it. I'll also note the pressure pattern is heaviest at the start of each letter and fades, consistent with someone tracing slowly rather than signing at natural speed. She sat back. In my professional opinion, to a reasonable degree of certainty, this signature is not authentic. I'll put that in a written report you can use in both the civil case and, if you pursue it, a criminal complaint. Criminal complaint, I repeated. Forging a signature on a real estate document is a felony in this state, Barnaby said quietly. Whoever did this didn't just try to take a slice of your house. They committed a crime doing it. That was the afternoon I decided I wasn't just walking away from a marriage. I was going to make sure the people who'd spent 11 years treating me like furniture with a pulse understood exactly what they'd done, in a room where it would be written down and could never be quietly explained away at another family dinner. I filed a police report the following Monday. I was assigned to Detective Renata Alvarez, 12 years with the department, the last 6 in the Economic and Financial Crimes Unit. She had the calm, unhurried manner of someone who had heard every excuse a person could invent and was no longer interested in performances. Real estate forgery cases are more common than people think, she told me, flipping through the folder Barnaby's office had prepared. Usually it's a caregiver, sometimes a family member trying to get ahead of an inheritance dispute before someone dies. What's unusual here is you caught it before the transfer recorded. Most victims don't find out until they try to sell the house years later and discover they don't fully own it anymore. There's something else, I said, and told her what Barnaby had uncovered the week before. The case from decades earlier, the one involving Finanella and her late husband's sister, a woman named Ophelia Thorne. Barnaby had sent an associate digging through county probate records once the pattern of the the forged quitclaim started to feel less like a one-time act of desperation and more like a technique. Barnaby had sent an associate digging through county probate records once the pattern of the forged quitclaim started to feel less like a one-time act of desperation and more like a technique. What they found made my skin crawl. 26 years earlier, when Grantham's father died, his estate had included a small rental property jointly willed to his sister Ophelia. Within 18 months, Ophelia's name had quietly come off the deed, replaced by Finanella's, through a document Ophelia herself later disputed in a probate filing, a filing that went nowhere because Ophelia died of a stroke before the hearing was ever held, and the case was dismissed for lack of a surviving petitioner. She was never charged, Barnaby told me. The case died with the only person willing to bring it. Detective Alvarez took notes without looking up. If that's documented in a probate filing, I want a copy. It doesn't prove anything about your case directly, but it establishes something prosecutors love and defense attorneys hate: pattern. A first offense looks like an isolated bad decision. A second one, with the same signature move, pun intended, starts looking like a person who's done this before and expects to get away with it again. I left the police station that day with my hands shaking in a way that had nothing to do with fear anymore. It was something closer to fury cooling into resolve. The weeks that followed were the closest thing to normal I'd had in a month. Custody mediation was scheduled. My design firm, which I'd built from a single client and a laptop at my kitchen table 9 years earlier into a 12-person studio with a waiting list, kept me busy enough during the day that I could almost forget, for 6 or 7 hours at a stretch, that my marriage was disintegrating in a courthouse file somewhere across town. Wilhelmina's teacher called me in for a conference in the middle of all of it, the kind of call that used to make my stomach drop before I'd learned to expect worse things. Mrs. Halloran was gentle about it. Wilhelmina had drawn a picture during free time of 2 houses with a long road between them, and underneath, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "I have 2 homes now, and that's okay." Mrs. Halloran wanted to make sure I knew, in case it meant something was wrong. I told her it meant the opposite. It meant my daughter had found her own way to make peace with something I was still working out how to explain to her. I cried in the parking lot afterward, the good kind of crying, the kind that doesn't ask anything of you except to let it happen. I tried mediation with Grantham twice that month, sitting across a conference table from him with a court-appointed mediator between us like a referee neither of us had asked for. The first session, he agreed to almost everything: the school schedule, the holidays, the health insurance. The second session, his mother's attorney showed up uninvited to observe, and Grantham went quiet again in that old, familiar way, deferring every question back to what his family would think. I watched 11 years of the same pattern play out in 90 minutes and understood, finally, that mediation wasn't going to fix what going along with things for a decade had already broken. "I'm not doing this again with an audience," I told the mediator. And after that, Barnaby handled every remaining exchange in writing. Grantham texted less. When he did, it wasn't apology anymore. It was warning, dressed up thin. "My mother says if this goes to the police, she'll make sure you regret it. Just talk to her, Joss. Please." I didn't answer that one. I forwarded it to Barnaby instead. Then, on a Tuesday in late October, everything accelerated at once. I found out about the emergency motion from Barnaby's office at 4:50 in the afternoon, 40 minutes before Denton's kindergarten pickup. Finanella, through an attorney I'd never heard of, had filed for an emergency custody hearing, citing the anniversary dinner incident, the slap I'd returned, the one that had started all of this. As evidence, I was, in the filing's words, prone to sudden and unpredictable acts of physical aggression, posing a risk to the minor children's safety and well-being. Attached was a sworn statement from Wilhelmina describing the moment I hit her back, conveniently omitting the fact that she'd struck me first in front of both our children. The hearing was set for the following morning. I had less than 18 hours. "They're trying to get ahead of the forgery case," Barnaby said on the phone, and I could hear him already moving, papers shuffling, a door closing behind him. "If they can get a judge to view you as volatile before the criminal complaint on the quitclaim goes anywhere, it muddies everything, makes you look like the unstable one instead of the victim of financial fraud. It's a chess move, Jocelyn, not a genuine safety concern, and I intend to prove that in the morning." I didn't sleep. I sat at my parents' kitchen table at 2 a.m., with Wilhelmina's spelling homework still spread across it from earlier that evening, and I ran through every version of the next day in my head until my hands went cold and stayed that way. My mother found me there at 3:40, made tea neither of us drank, and sat with me without saying much, which was its own kind of mercy. 6:15 a.m. Shower. Hands still cold under the water. 7 sao. Wilhelmina asked why I was up so early. I told her Mommy had a meeting. Not a lie. Not the whole truth either. 7:40. Barnaby texted, "Doorbell footage confirmed and pulled. Alvarez's report will be ready by 8:30. We're in good shape. Breathe." I didn't feel like I was in good shape. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something with no railing, 18 hours compressed into a handful of minutes that kept refusing to move fast enough. What if the judge didn't care about a decade-old probate case? What if a felony investigation somehow made me look worse instead of better? A woman tangled up in scandal rather than a woman who'd uncovered one. What if it came down, in the end, to a single slap on on a single night, and nothing else I could show anyone mattered next to that. I got dressed. I put on the navy blazer I wear to client pitches, because some part of me understood that today was, in its own way, the most important pitch of my life. Not for a client, but for the right to keep my own children in my own home. At 9 or that morning, in a courtroom that smelled like dust and old carpet cleaner, Barnaby laid out what we had. Detective Alvarez's preliminary report on the forged quitclaim, Dr. Pratt's signature analysis, Oswald Kim's financial trail showing the systematic transfers to Wilhelmina's business, Marisol Vance's sworn statement about the falsified invoices and the threat made against her, and, crucially, video from a neighbor's doorbell camera across the street from Grantham's parents' house, footage none of us had known existed until Barnaby's investigator canvassed the block, showing the anniversary dinner's aftermath from outside, me walking out calmly with both children's hands in mine. No chaos, no danger, just a woman leaving. Wilhelmina's attorney tried to argue the slap alone proved a pattern of aggression. Barnaby stood, unhurried, and said the 6 words I still remember more clearly than almost anything else from that week. She struck my client first, Judge. Then he played the audio. Wilhelmina hadn't known her own sister-in-law's phone had been recording from an accidental pocket dial during the argument that started it all. A stroke of pure, unplanned luck none of us had realized we possessed until Barnaby's team reviewed my phone's call logs 3 weeks earlier and found a 9-minute voicemail left by accident, capturing Wilhelmina's voice clear as day. "You forget your place in this family," followed by the unmistakable crack of a slap, followed by my own voice low and even, delivering the line back. The judge denied the emergency custody motion, not narrowly, not with hesitation. She called the filing a transparent attempt to leverage an ongoing criminal investigation into a custody advantage, and ordered Finanella's attorney to explain in writing within 10 days why sanctions shouldn't apply for a bad faith filing. I walked out of that courtroom and threw up in the parking lot, quietly, behind my own car, out of pure release rather than fear. Barnaby handed me a bottle of water and didn't say anything about it, which I appreciated more than any congratulations could have. That should have been the end of the crisis. It wasn't. 2 days later, Detective Alvarez called to tell me the district attorney's Economic Crimes Division had reviewed the forgery file, along with Oswald Kim's financial analysis and the pattern established by the Ophelia Thorne probate case, and decided to open a formal criminal investigation into Finanella, not just for the forged quitclaim, but for what prosecutors were now calling a broader scheme involving the laundering of funds through Thorne and Wren Catering to disguise embezzlement from the family trust Grantham's late father had left behind, a trust I hadn't even known still existed until that phone call. "There's a trust?" I asked. "A modest one," Alvarez said, "funded when Grantham's father died. Meant to be split between him and Wilhelmina at 40, held in trust until then. Your husband's forensic accountant found withdrawals against it that don't match any documented purpose. We're still tracing where that money actually went, but early indicators point to the same place as your $60,000, Wilhelmina's business and possibly Finanella's own accounts." Grantham called me that night, and for the first time in weeks, I answered. "They came to me," he said, voice flat and hollow in a way I'd never heard from him. "The DA's office, they wanted to know what I knew about the trust withdrawals." A long pause. "I didn't know all of it, Jose. I swear to you I didn't know about the trust, or Ophelia, or how bad the business really was. But I knew about some of the transfers. My mother told me it was temporary, that Wilhelmina would pay it back once a big contract came through. I let it happen because it was easier than fighting her, the same way it was easier not to say anything at dinner. You had 11 years to say something," I said. "You had 11 years, Grantham, and you chose easier every single time." He didn't argue. "Had 11 years to say something," I said. "You had 11 years, Grantham, and you chose easier every single time." He didn't argue. That, more than any apology he'd offered in the past month, told me how far gone things really were between us. The investigation moved fast after that, the way things sometimes do once enough separate threads finally connect into one visible rope. Detective Alvarez executed a search warrant on Thorne and Wren Catering's business records in November, seizing 2 sets of books that confirmed everything Marisol had already told us. Oswald Kim's forensic accounting traced roughly $140,000 moved over 6 years from the family trust and my household account into Wilhelmina's business, and from there into Finanella's personal accounts, in amounts just small enough, individually, to avoid automatic reporting. Dr. Pratt's forensic report on the quitclaim signature was entered into both the criminal file and my divorce proceeding. Combined with the 26-year-old probate dispute involving Ophelia, which Barnaby's team had since located a surviving witness for, an elderly former neighbor who remembered Ophelia's fury and confusion in the months before her death, Prosecutors felt confident enough to bring formal charges: forgery, attempted fraud, and embezzlement, all against Finanella. Wilhelmina was charged separately for the falsified business invoices and the threat made against Marisol, which fell under witness intimidation once the criminal case was underway. A local news station picked up the story in early December, once the charges became public record. A reporter named Delia Fenn from Channel 9's investigative desk called Barnaby's office requesting comment, and after a long conversation about what I was and wasn't comfortable sharing, I agreed to a short interview, not for revenge, though I won't pretend that impulse wasn't somewhere in me, but because Marisol had risked her own reputation to come forward, and I didn't want her to be the only one whose face was attached to this story. Some people build their whole identity around who they can control, I told Delia Fenn, sitting in my own living room with late afternoon light coming through the window behind me. I spent 11 years thinking the price of staying in this family was smallness. Turns out the price was actually closer to $140,000, and a house they tried to steal a piece of. I'm not telling this story because I want pity. I'm telling it because I think there are other people sitting at dinner tables right now, telling themselves the same thing I told myself for over a decade, that this is just how families are, that speaking up makes you the problem. It doesn't. It never did. The segment aired the following week. Wilhelmina's catering business, already gutted by the seizure of records and the collapse of what little client trust remained, closed permanently within a month. Finanella, facing felony charges with real evidence rather than a family's willingness to look away, accepted a plea agreement in February rather than risk trial. 5 years probation, full restitution ordered, a permanent record that would follow her for the rest of her life. Wilhelmina pled to a lesser charge tied to the falsified invoices and received 18 months probation, along with a restitution order to Marisol for the wages she'd been shorted. My divorce from Grantham finalized in March. I kept the house free and clear, the attempted quitclaim transfer voided and expunged from county records entirely, as though it had never been filed at all. I was awarded full physical custody of Wilhelmina and Denton, with Grantham granted supervised visitation for the first 6 months, while a court-appointed therapist, Dr. Cedrice, Anissa Okafor, worked with both kids through what she gently called a significant disruption in their sense of family safety. Grantham didn't fight the terms. I think by then he understood there was nothing left in him that could argue he deserved more. He testified against his mother in the end, when the case reached a point where his testimony mattered, not out of some late arrival of courage, I think, but because his own attorney told him cooperation was the only thing standing between him and being swept into the embezzlement charges alongside her. Whatever the reason, he sat in that courtroom and confirmed under oath everything Detective Alvarez's investigation had already proven. His mother didn't look at him once. I watched her not look at him, and I understood, finally and completely, exactly what kind of family I'd spent 11 years trying to belong to. I saw Finanella one more time after that, at the restitution hearing in April, both of us seated on opposite sides of a courtroom that had become almost familiar by then. She didn't apologize. I hadn't expected her to. What I hadn't expected was the way she looked at me, not with hatred, which I could have understood, but with something closer to bewilderment, as though she genuinely could not comprehend how a daughter-in-law she'd spent a decade putting in her place had ended up the one holding all the paperwork. "You always did think you were smarter than this family," she said to me in the hallway afterward, low enough that only I could hear it. "No," I said. "I just stopped thinking I had to pretend I wasn't." I didn't slap her. I didn't need to. The truth had already done more damage than my hand ever could. It's been 8 months now since that anniversary dinner. My firm closed out its best year yet in the spring. A hospitality client in the city, a boutique hotel renovation that landed us in a regional design magazine, the kind of write-up I used to daydream about back when I was running the whole business out of a spare bedroom and a card table. Wilhelmina asked me last week, completely unprompted, whether it was okay that she didn't miss the big house with her grandmother in it. I told her it was more than okay. I told her some places aren't home just because you're told to call them that. Denton still sees his father every other weekend, supervised visits having graduated, slowly and under Dr. Okafor's careful sign-off, into unsupervised time. Grantham and I are civil now in the particular, careful way that divorced parents learn to be, brief at pickups, polite at school events, nothing more. I don't think he's forgiven himself, and honestly, I've stopped spending energy wondering whether he should. Dr. Okafor told me at our last check-in that both kids had stopped flinching at raised voices on television, a small detail she said mattered more than it sounds like it should. Denton finally asked his question. The one he'd swallowed back in October. Not why we left, but whether it was his fault somehow, whether he'd done something wrong that night at dinner. I got down on the kitchen floor with him and told him the only thing that was ever true, that grown-ups sometimes build whole lives on things that aren't real, and it takes other grown-ups a while to notice, and none of it, not one piece of it, was ever about anything a 5-year-old did or didn't do. He nodded like he believed me. I think, slowly, he actually does. Marisol Vance started her own catering consulting business this summer. Legitimate books. One set, she told me with a small, tired laugh laugh when we met for coffee to catch up. I was her first client. We did the numbers for my company's holiday party together, both of us finding something quietly satisfying in double-checking every invoice line by line. I still think sometimes about the exact second my hand came up off that table and met Wilhelmina's cheek. People online who found the news story afterward called it the moment I finally stood up for myself, and maybe it was. But I've come to believe the more important moment happened 3 weeks later, in a small windowless room with a forensic examiner and a magnifying light, when I found out someone had tried to steal a piece of my own house out from under me and forge my name to do it. The slap was instinct. What came after? That was a choice. I chose to stop being smaller than the truth, and it turned out the truth was more than large enough to hold every single thing they'd taken from me, and then some. Wilhelmina posted once more after the segment aired, before her account went private for good. No caption this time, just a single photo of an empty kitchen, stripped of its equipment, the Thorn and Wren sign already pulled down from the wall behind her. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. Some things don't require the last word. They just require someone finally willing to check the paperwork.